Welcome to this episode of the From the Hart podcast presented by Orange Kiwi Consulting and Crisp Imaging. I'm excited to introduce to you two gentlemen that are names that I've known for a long time. I've read some of the books, especially books that Bo has written. I've now read the book we're going to talk about today called Another Way, Building Companies That Last and Last and Last. Dave Whorton and Bo Burlingham, welcome this morning. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules and book tours and everything else you're doing to be on the podcast. So Dave and Bo, thanks again. It's really great to see the two of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So I'll get into your bios and your backgrounds, and I think we'll just pretty much weave that through the conversation this morning. Just to start, though, so that our audience can, those that are watching on YouTube or listening on the various different platforms that we use for the audio portion of the podcast, I'd love for them just to get to know a little bit about each of you, your background, maybe some mentors or others in your lives that have really shaped and molded you. And eventually, let's talk a little bit about how the two of you came together. And then we'll dive into talking about the book and about Tugboat Institute, which, Dave, you're going to tell us about here in a moment. But listen, Dave, earlier before we hit record, Bo delegated Dave to go first. So here we go. So, Dave, you're batting leadoff. Tell us just how did you wherever you want to go with early mentors, your path.
Sure. So I was actually raised in Virginia, Richmond and Fairfax, until the age of 13. And then we relocated to Sonoma County, just north of San Francisco. And I describe in the book, one of the very important early experiences I had was working at Hewlett-Packard. And I spent 4 summers working there starting at the age of 16, stuff in circuit boards, doing stuff under a microscope, and just basic manufacturing work. And so that had a pretty big impression on me. Not any single individual at any of those factories. There's 3 factories in Sonoma County, but Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard from a distance had a tremendous impact on me and kind of learning about the HP way. As I ended up going to Cal Berkeley. I ended up at Bain & Company for several years in San Francisco, a brief stint at Interwest Partners. Before I did that, I was at Optical Engineering in Santa Rosa, kind of returning to my hometown to help try to build that industrial CO2 laser company. I spent a stint at Stanford Business School and then Kleiner Perkins. Founded my own company, Good Technology, backed by Kleiner and Benchmark. We sold that to Motorola for about $500 million. Co-founded drugstore.com with the Kleiner team. I was working on that in business school, and they jumped on board with the idea and helped take that into being a public company that was later sold. And then I worked at TPG, helping lead their venture capital groups. I got exposure to private equity and kind of how they thought about doing things. I consider them one of the top private equity firms. And then I started my own venture capital firm, Tugboat Ventures, for a short stint, which rolled into Tugboat Institute. And along the way, a number of very important mentors. John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins was a critical mentor, one of the most successful venture capitalists in history, if not the most successful. Dave Strom at Greylock Partners. We did a number of investments together, including Success Factors. I learned a lot from him. Burt McMurtry, he was the chairman of the board of trustees at Stanford and one of the original venture capitalists. Came out from Rice to the Bay Area back in, I think, the 60s, and was one of the first to put together a venture capital fund. That fund ended up later splitting and becoming August Capital and Benchmark Capital, 2 well-known firms today. And so just had some wonderful mentors along the way, which I'm forever grateful for.
That's excellent. So you've seen not only from the inside great companies, but I'm sure that working with all those organizations you mentioned, you were able to observe a lot of other companies as well, because, vendors you worked with and other customers and so forth. So I love that because you obviously have worked with some really fantastic organizations, very household name organizations that most of all, if not all of us, know about. So I'm eager to hear more as we get into this conversation about how some of those unique experiences kind of shaped you into who you are and helped you get into, as you mentioned, the launch of Tugboat Institute. Before we go there, let's go to our good friend Bo, who's batting second today. Bo, let's same things, just how you got started and what comes to mind. I'm sure that the years of writing and editing and speaking and consulting and all the different things in different companies you worked for, it's hard to encapsulate again in just a couple of minutes. But just when I ask you, kind of tell us about how you got started, what comes to mind?
Well, I suppose the key episode for me was that I went to work at Fidelity Investments in 1982, and after a year, I was that was my introduction to business. Before then, I had been probably as anti-business as you can get. But I went to Fidelity, and I had a very interesting time there and learned a lot. And I was recruited shortly thereafter to Inc. magazine, which was a startup in Boston at that time. And it was founded by Bernard Goldhirsch, and the editor-in-chief was George Gendron, and George recruited me to be a member of the staff, be actually a senior editor at Inc. When I first started, and I really that was really the key episode for me, the key experience that shaped my subsequent writing. And through Inc., I met a number of people who were very important to me. There was none who was more important than Jack Stack. Jack Stack is the CEO, founder, co-founder, and CEO of Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation. He is probably most widely known as the innovator of what's called open book management. That is the idea that you teach everybody in the company how to run the business, how to read the financials, and then you provide them with the information. Basically, you're telling everybody in the business. Now, at the time that he did this, most people thought he was crazy, and but he was very successful at this, and I met him through Inc. magazine and became very entranced, really, by what he was doing. And the opportunity came to write a book about this. We had written a couple of articles in Inc. magazine about it, but it really seemed that there needed to be a book about it. And so the book was called The Great Game of Business, which was the term that Jack used to describe exactly what he was doing and what his people needed to understand in order to play the game as well as they have. And, they began at 16 million. They're now close to $1 billion. And they have totally shown that this method of running a company can be very, very effective. And I learned a tremendous amount from Jack and various people connected with that, including Tom Peters and with Jim Collins. But it's really Jack and I and the people who I knew and interviewed and talked to and learned from at Inc. magazine. Now, toward the end of my time at Inc., I was there for like 35 years.
Yeah.
And toward the end, I heard about this organization it was in Silicon Valley, which surprised the hell out of me because it was mainly interested in private companies. And I didn't know anybody in Silicon Valley was interested in private companies. Right. And one thing led to another, and I decided to write an article about this company. I went and interviewed Dave Whorton, who was the founder of the Tugboat Institute, and who was really developing this idea, minimize in any way that what I've learned from Dave, because Dave has been one of the major mentors to me as well. And one thing led to another. I did write the article about Tugboat Institute and about Dave, and that led to us eventually deciding to do a book together. And that brings us up to the present, more or less.
I love that. I appreciate that. One of the things that is occurring to me as the two of you are talking, and I work predominantly with family-owned businesses and a lot with the next generation. And one of the topics that comes up a lot is mentorships. And one of the things I love about a great mentorship, I'm blessed that one of my mentors, you both know, Ken Blanchard. And he shared with me once that mentorship is very, very much two-way. It's not top down and it's not bottom up. It's two-way. I don't know what I do to mentor Ken Blanchard, if anything, but I certainly know that he mentors me, but he has shared some things that I've shared with him, which just blows me away. But I see that in the two of you. I
Yeah.
see that you obviously both have just shared some mentors that you've had, but I've picked up in our conversations before today and in the beginning of this introduction, that great respect and mutual admiration and really mentor mentee that goes both ways with the two of you. Is that an adequate thing or a fair and adequate thing to say?
I think well said. Well said.
Yeah, I
Very,
appreciate
very
that.
good. That's definitely true.
Your book, Another Way, Building Companies That Last and Last and Last. I just want to start by saying it's a great book. If you're an organization that's just starting out or you've been running your company for 100 years or anywhere in between, the concepts in the book and the real life data and background and stories are so life-changing for me, who works with so many different companies. It's also endorsed by some people whose names you might know: Stephen M.R. Covey, Daniel Pink, Dennis Jaffe, who I am very close to, who's a great family business guru, Howard Behar, former president of Starbucks, who's coming up in 2 weeks on our podcast, Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet and one of the most popular TED Talks out there, The Power of Introverts, which I show all my college students. Talk about the impact. Let's dive into the book and talk about it in a minute, but kind of beginning with the end in mind, if you will, a little bit. Talk about the impact of this book that you've seen so far that's either surprised you or hasn't surprised you in the early days of this book being out. Dave, why don't we start with you? What impact have you noticed or heard about from people like the ones who endorsed it and obviously many others?
Yeah, I guess it's been very well received. And Bo told me he shared this, and so I hope I'm sharing something he'd want to share, but he said, look, it's hard to know because you get so close to the book.
Right.
You're writing it, and you can lose perspective. And so while I felt this could be a very impactful book, and I love the way Bo wrote the book. I mean, where he started us kind of at the Kleiner Perkins, how I get introduced to John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins, and kind of just shoots you right out of the gates with that experience in the dot-com boom. But yeah, it's been very rewarding. And what is particularly rewarding for me is when I get emails or see it on LinkedIn or other communications, or somebody said this book had an incredibly important impact on me. It validated how I think about business. And, I was wondering if I was the only one that thought this way. And it feels like this is common sense. And you validated this for me. And it doesn't have to be about raising venture capital or selling to a private equity firm. It doesn't have to be that your goal is to be a public company or generating wealth through a high valued sale, but I can build something meaningful over my lifetime and then have future generations, whether it be employees or families or both, carry this forward. This very important thing, this contribution that I've helped create from nothing. And so that's been rewarding. And then there's multi-generational family businesses that have also said, wow, we've been doing this for 100, 150 years.
And you wrote the blueprint of what we've been doing.
Yeah, that, while we have our own set of values, these 7 principles you talk about, the evergreen 7 Ps, are a really good articulation of really how we've been building this business for a long time. So it's not only the excitement of the founders, but it's kind of reinforced by these very successful, enduring businesses too. And so, yeah, so this has been great. And I got to tell you also, there was parts of the book that Bo really pushed me hard on. We all have our life stories. We all have our highs and lows. And I sure would have loved to just skip along on the highs and let me do that.
Can't we just stay up here?
Exactly. And, and I think that's part of it too, because I've heard from a lot of our members at Tugboat Institute, there's a level of humility in hearing the struggles I had too. I mean, this just wasn't an up and to the right journey through my career. I've had some major setbacks too. And some of those setbacks probably gave me the strength to do what I'm doing today. So I don't take it for granted.
I had a woman on the podcast just the other day from the Flying Walendas. I don't know if you're familiar with the high wire team. And she fell in 2017 and nearly died, broke every bone in her face, and just, all kinds of, and our conversation really focused not necessarily on the fall, but the learning experience from the fall. And I'm kind of hearing that a little bit in you, the figurative fall, if you will. And yeah, to your point, none of us go bottom left to top right on the chart. We have all the zigzags and the ups and downs and the valleys and so forth. And I appreciate you sharing that and being so authentic and real with us as well, because yeah, if you look at your bios, our bios read from bottom left to top right, where we started, where we are. We don't say, and then I lost my job and I got fired and I pissed off all of my employees and they left. We don't put that on our resume or in our bios, but it happened and it really taught us more than the successes did for the most part. I think we learned more from those failures. Bo, you've written several books: Finish Big, Small Giants, Street Smarts. You mentioned The Great Game of Business. others as well in another way. Can you talk about the collaboration of working with Dave on this? Dave teed it up a little bit of how you kind of shot it out of the gate to start. You've collaborated with some great authors over the years, not only on these books, but obviously writing for Inc. Can you talk about this process before we dive actually into the contents?
Yes, I would like to say that I've learned so much. I mean, for me, writing a book is about learning. I don't know how to write a book where I'm not learning as I'm writing it. And that was very much the case with this book because Dave knew a lot about business. First place, Dave had a set of very different experiences in business from Silicon Valley, Kleiner Perkins, to what he's doing now and what he was doing in between. And I've just learned so much from Dave and from Dave's story. I will also say that I've learned a tremendous amount from the members of the Tugboat Institute. They are an extraordinary group of people and who have all, really built companies and learned so much about building those companies, and that so many of us can learn from. We write about a little bit about that in the book with a few examples, like Radio Flyer, for example,
Right.
and a number of other companies. I would just emphasize that this has been putting a spotlight on a part of the economy that has been largely ignored up until now. People talk about public companies, people talk about small businesses. Most of these businesses are not very small, and some are very, very large. They also aren't public. They're private companies, so they don't get covered in the major business magazines or the Wall Street Journal and so forth. And in a sense, they've been, until Dave came along, they've been hidden. They're an important, a critical part of the American economy. I mean, I could say the international economy because these types of companies exist in Europe and in Japan as well. But it's really shown a spotlight on this part of the economy that had been largely ignored up until this point. And I would hope that another way, in terms of, would not only show them and explain exactly why they're so important, but also would encourage other people, business professors and other business magazines and business writers, to pay attention to these businesses.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking as you're talking about small businesses right out of the gate, Dave and I were talking before we recorded and just before you jumped on, Bo, about, an evergreen company, if you will, can be a 10 or 12-year-old company or a 150-year-old company in between, because you're still applying these same principles. You're still applying these other ways, if you will, to play off the title of the book another way. I want to talk just briefly. I think that we could do 7 different podcasts because you got the 7 Ps. Today, we've decided to focus in on one of the Ps, but the other 6, just for the way of our listeners, and we'll put all the contacts and the websites and link to the book and everything in the show notes, both on the audio as well as the video portion of this podcast. But the 7 Ps, and if you want to touch on any of these briefly before we get into paced growth, we can certainly do that. But purpose, and these are things that you see in these successful companies: purpose, perseverance, people first, private, profit, paced growth, and pragmatic innovation. And as I mentioned, we could probably spend an hour in each of those areas. As I look at the companies that I've worked with on the family business side of things, and then companies where I've worked for the 35 years in my career as well, those are 7 amazing things that I look at. Man, if these companies would have just understood these 7 categories, it would have been made such a dramatic difference in the outcomes and in the successes and in the people and in the morale and everything else within these companies. As we talked a few weeks ago and we kind of honed in on paced growth, let's get into that. But are there any others of those 7 Ps that just, Dave, pop into your head now, or Bo, that you'd like to just address that you've seen, or some? I mean, they're all important. They're all common denominators in successful companies.
Well, I think I think that in many ways the most valuable part of the book is the part which explains the process that Dave went through to come up with these 7 Ps. So it was important because he realized that it, it wasn't enough just to call them evergreen companies, that you had to describe exactly what they did and what they had in common to distinguish them from a lot of other companies. And he went through that process, and he went through each one of the Ps, and we write about that in another way. I know I learned a lot just from talking to Dave and from looking at the way that he went through developing these principles. Actually, in some ways, it's just the characteristics. He was describing the best companies that he had seen and what they had in common. And it wasn't so much that they had tried to do these 7 things as that they had done them. And in many cases, they'd done them just because that's who they are. Dave recognized that, and that's how he came up with the 7 Ps.
I think that's great. That makes so much sense. Yeah, it's just we didn't map it out this way. We just looked back and wow, look at the things we've done. So, which certainly then creates a map for those that are on the front end, at the bottom left of the graph, to use the analogy that we keep talking about. So, Dave, you want to talk a little bit about that process of how you came up with these 7?
So one is that each of them there's opportunities to mature against each of the 7 Ps. You can be better at each of these things. There's a whole set of best practices that each of those Ps represent, but the Ps also act as a system. And so like all things, if you turn one knob in a system, it can affect other things downstream. So you have to look at that overall as a system. And you will make trade-offs. For example, you're going into a tough part of the economy. Maybe we're going into a recessionary period. You might sacrifice a little bit of profit to take care of your people. Now, that's something an evergreen company would do. And many evergreen companies have never had layoffs. When they commit to hire somebody, they're committing to a long-term relationship with those individuals. Man, people are laying off people daily in the public companies. I think I just saw another round of layoffs done by Benioff to once again prove that he's just a really efficient operator of companies, saying AI allowed him to replace most of his customer service people. Not sure what happened to them, not sure how they were taken care of, but very transactional. You don't see that in evergreen companies. But the P that really I think people have to understand is, of all the Ps, one stands above all the rest, and I would treat all the others as equals, and that's purpose. Ultimately, what is the purpose of this business? Yeah. And what does that purpose allow everybody around that company to do because of that commitment? And if the purpose of a company is to make the venture capitalist who backed you wealthy, or the private equity general partners wealthy, there's a set of activities that will be demanded from that business over time to make sure that's achieved. And I'd call that's kind of the authentic purpose of a venture-backed company or a private equity-owned company, is to generate maximum wealth for the partners in the specific fund that is invested in that company, if you want to be very specific. In an evergreen company, it's not that. The purpose is usually something to do related to how they want to see a market changed, or what kind of organization want to build to the benefit of the employees. And when you have an authentic purpose like that, everybody can rally around it. The employees.
We're not rallying around making the owner rich. We're rallying around what our company's about.
Exactly. And that's a very powerful thing because, things are always tested in the toughest of times. And when in the toughest of times, if that North Star is really clear, employees still show up for work. Customers still buy those products. Customers defend that company if it's attacked publicly and unfairly. And so purpose is really important, and the ability to have an authentic purpose is really important. Public companies fall in the same trap too, and Milton Friedman talked about this back in the 1970s, the New York Times article, and he basically said the real purpose of a public company is ultimately to generate profits to benefit the shareholders. And why do you have to do that? Because at the time, there's a lot of conglomerates where the executives were enriching themselves ahead of the shareholders. But he did say, and people miss this, in the context of a private company, they can have an authentic purpose of whatever they choose because they are the private owners of the business. And that's what's so wonderful about evergreen companies. That's why private is so important, because the private is what allows you to protect the purpose. So you can have a meaningful purpose, a true North Star that's not just generating wealth for a small group of shareholders. And that's a very powerful thing over time.
You're making
Yeah.
me think of the great parable of the three bricklayers. You know, the
Yeah.
first bricklayer, what are you doing? I'm laying brick. Second one, what are you doing? I'm building a wall. Third one, what are you doing? I'm building a cathedral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are
You know,
cathedral builders.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we want cathedral builders. We want people who know they're building cathedrals every day, not just laying bricks or building a wall in their little department. Such
Right.
a great, powerful way to look at that. Thanks, Dave. Bo, I stepped on you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that this is an answer to the basic question about why this company is on Earth. Why does this company exist when you ask them? And it's because of something, their goal, what they're trying to do is something that is greater than earning a profit, as important as that is. It's greater than anything. It's something that actually motivates them and motivates the people who work in the company to give their best effort to to creating this business and to making this business as successful as possible, to have the greatest effect on the most people as possible. As Dave said, that's really the foundation of it all. Is they have to know why it is that this organization is important to have in the world.
Yeah.
You
And
talked, Bo, about Jim Collins and his good to great, obviously getting the right people on the bus. I keep hearing that as you're talking. So in sports, everybody talks about, I'm a big sports guy. If you look at behind me, you probably see baseballs and trophies and things that represent, my sports history, not my trophies, but anyway, there's the age old argument, what creates what? Does great culture create winning, or does winning create great culture? When I think about purpose in an organization and winning, that is success, building cathedrals, not laying stone. What comes to mind for you, either of you, Dave or Bo? Do great people create great companies, or do great companies create great people? Obviously, I think the answer is both, but I mean, where would you put the emphasis on that?
I put it on
well,
people.
I'd like to hear what Dave has to say about that.
Sure. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I put it on people because every company in its founding was founded by an individual who didn't found itself.
Yeah. Yep. Starts with one, at least.
Yeah, it didn't stop as a culture independent of the people. And so what ends up happening in many of these companies is that, it takes a while. It can take 5 or 10 years, but eventually you get that right core team in place.
Yeah.
And that team represents a set of values and behaviors and norms that really lead to exceptional performance of the individuals on the team at the time, and the ability to add additional exceptional human beings to that team, and such that continues to build on itself and becomes a very virtuous cycle. But it doesn't often happen early. It takes a while and a certain size and scale, a certain level of resources. I mean, my heart goes out to every founder. It is really hard work to create something from nothing. And to do it from your own fuel. You can't hire a senior executive team of 5 people who are deeply experienced in each of their functional areas and have them build out their teams from below, which you do in the venture model. Instead, you're going to have to kind of do a lot of the work yourself. You'll get enough resources at some point, excess profits, to hire one senior person. And then you're going to hire a second senior person a bit later. The junior people, you're still scaffolding and trying to show how to do things and making a lot of mistakes. But eventually you get to a size and scale. This may be 5, 10, $15 million, where you start having an executive team and you're delegating effectively. And that team is really locking in on the values and culture, norms and behaviors of that firm. And then I think it's a magical thing from there. And it can be broken and it can be ruined. And the thing that I think we all understand is that the most important role in these companies is the CEO. And if that succession, and Bo wrote about this in his book, Finish Big, if that succession is not handled well, you can send a company deeply off rails if the board of directors is not paying attention in the ownership group. On the other hand, done well, oh my God. I mean,
Yeah.
look at Enterprise Rental Car. We write about this in the book. Andy Taylor took over from his dad, Jack. Jack built a beautiful regional business doing, I think it was 60 million roughly when Jack joined, or Andy joined. I think became CEO when was doing about 85 million. They scaled it to, 20, 23 billion, just doing what they do extremely well all throughout the country with many, many happy customers and employees. And so people, I don't think you can get away from that. Now, Warren Buffett will say, if you got a bad business model and a great team, the business model is going to win. It's going to bring you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And there is truth to that. But I would say smart people then adapt.
The best driver in the world can't drive a car with no engine.
That's right. Right. Exactly. But a driver's not going to get in a car with no engine because a smart driver is going to say, I want a car with a good engine. And if it's not working well, I'm going to fix it. So I'd say it comes back to people again. if the business model is weak and it's a dynamic team, they will fix the business model, or they'll go into a totally different business, which he did himself. I mean, his core business when he started was terrible. He was in the textiles industry. He was running mills, and he had the good judgment to shut that down and start investing in other places. So again, I'll keep coming back to team and the CEO and the core leadership team.
And I love that. I sat down with a group of business owners about 6 or 7 years ago in a roundtable setting, in a family business setting. And I went around the CEOs and said, we did sort of a Jeffersonian conversation, one topic, we're all on the same topic. And the topic I posed was, when did you know you'd made it? When did you have that minute or that moment where you thought, wow, this is going to work? A couple of them talked about revenue numbers they hit. A couple of them talked about number of employees they hit. The one answer that stood out to me was, when our employee engagement results came back at a level that we were shooting for decades, that's when I knew we'd made it. We have happy people who come to work building cathedrals. He didn't say that. I'm using today's conversation, but in essence, they're saying, hey, we love that we get to come build cathedrals with you every day. And that's when we knew we made it. We're making an impact on the culture.
Which probably tells you a lot about what that company's purpose is.
Yeah, they understand their purpose.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like I said, we could stay on purpose all day, and I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the 7 pillars of a stool. We talk about the 3 pillars or the 4 legs of a chair. If one falls, the chair falls. I think if one of these falls, the whole company does. But as promised, we want to talk about paced growth, because I definitely think that, I look at Radio Flyer. Bo, you mentioned them before. Dave and I talked about them a little bit. I saw a post by Robert earlier this morning about their organization as well, and I've heard him speak. That paced growth, I think, illustrates them very well, and other companies that you talk about in the book. I'm going to ask an obvious question here, but maybe there's one person listening where it's not obvious. I'm asking it for that person. Why is paced growth so much better than just, I hate to use the term overnight success, but what have you seen in companies that have had fast growth versus paced growth to make paced growth one of your 7 pillars?
Oh, well, I'm happy to enter into
And
say a few words
keep
about
in mind that celebrated the fastest growing companies in the country through the Inc. list. So
Nothing wrong with a fast growing company, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, so much of the business world and the prestige that companies get, or the recognition that they get, is based on the speed with which they grow. Now, the speed with which they grow is very important to the investors, because the investors have to have customers of their own. It's easy to forget that the customers of the investors are not the companies they invest in. They are the people who have donated the money that allows the institution to exist. And the goal of the company is to help those investors, those customers, and to make those customers successful. Once you take money from either venture capitalists or private equity people, you're committed to trying to deliver to them what they're looking for, which is an increase in their value and in their wealth as fast as possible. Now, in fact, if you do not take venture capital or private equity and you build a company just to achieve the purpose that you've stated, that you've had for this, whether you grow to take SRC, Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation. I mean, this is a company which was growing like 15% a year when we were looking at it. Well, it went from 16 million to almost $1 billion today. If you are paced growth, if the company is paced growth, over time, it might well achieve more than can be achieved if the company works on growing as fast as possible.
I like that paced doesn't necessarily mean slow.
Right.
Just understanding your pace and being consistent with your pace, I think, is what you emphasize too in the book.
Yes.
And there's a non-intuitive side of this too. It's easy to imagine that rates of growth can be higher when a company is small, right? Because you're working from a small base. So the assumption is as companies get a lot larger, naturally that growth rate will slow down. And that is true, except there's kind of this very magical company that's kind of, let's say, in the 50, 100 million range that actually, because they've built such a strong foundation over could have been a 15, 20-year period, their growth rates actually accelerate and they start growing faster because they're reinvesting the resources more wisely, they're acquiring companies more wisely. They're just doing business really well. So it's not one of these things that it's fast as it rates when it's small, going lower and lower and lower, like it's some kind of asymptotic curve. There are exceptions to that based on the strength of the foundation that was built. And why it's so important for evergreen companies under pace growth is that it allows them to be self-funded. And there's other important benefits, but the first and primary is if you grow at rates that are higher than your natural growth rate that's generated by your business model, you have to take outside capital. That's only you can sustain those growth rates.
Right.
And so if you're going to grow 50, 70, 100% a year, more than 100% a year, typically there are no business models that will afford those growth rates, at least when the companies are small. So you have to go raise venture capital and outside capital. Now, at some point in time, the companies do get large enough, particularly with high gross margin business like software, where they do start generating more cash. And that's getting to be earlier and earlier with things like AI and the need for smaller teams to develop product. So that's kind of an exciting development that AI unlocks. But there's other benefits to pace growth too. It allows you to hire people more thoughtfully into your team. If you're growing at 100% a year, keep in mind, you're growing your team 100% too, because growth is often very much tied to headcount in our current business models, at least American business models. And so 100 to 200, 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600, you're doing this every single year. So the team is spending a tremendous amount of time recruiting, and you're going to make mistakes. And you're not going to onboard well, and you're not going to train well, and you're going to get tired. But if you're growing at 20% a year, in contrast, think about adding 20% of the current employee base each year. You can be very selective. You can onboard carefully. You can make sure they're really aligned with the norms and behaviors and cultures you've established with the firm. Make sure they're contributing in a successful way. So that's another dimension of benefit. Another dimension of benefit is for the inexperienced executive who's a founder. It gives them the chance to learn and grow, and not just sit there under this crushing pressure of trying to understand how to scale a firm this large, this fast, which usually leads to the replacement of the founder. Now, I say all this because there are some small, narrow set of market opportunities where winning first, winner take all kind of dynamics do exist, but it's much less than they're actually described. Because you can look at a number of companies that were not first that became the big winners. Apple's was not first with the smartphone. Facebook was not first with social media. I mean, these were all, I mean, Apple was very late in the game of smartphones, but then just did it better, and so paced growth allows you to compound your capital over long periods of time, which Warren Buffett calls, or maybe even goes back to Ben Franklin, the eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, something going 15, 20% for 30 or 40 years becomes very, very big. And people misunderstand that and they don't appreciate it. And I encourage people just get an Excel spreadsheet, put 50 years on the bottom axis, and then just do a calculation starting at, say, 10 of growing at 15% a year on a compounded basis.
Yeah.
And then you'll see that curve goes up massively. That firm is now a $660 million company if it started at 10 million, a little bit like Bo said with SRC starting from 16 going to $1 billion. See this over and over again. So you compound growth, you compound culture, you compound your ability to innovate, to execute. Your brand compounds over time too. Brands gain strength over time through consistent behavior. What is a brand? It's a sum of all experiences that people are having with that company. And you can paint a brand with a lot of marketing dollars, but over long periods of time, ultimately the brand will represent the experiences customers are having with you and the employees are having with you. And so that compounds over time. Your ability to acquire and integrate companies successfully, that compounds over time. So a lot plays to your benefit if you're willing to commit your entire life to building something and having that level of focus versus trying to get in and out like I did early in my career in 5 to 10 years, and better, shorter, right? Move on to the next thing. And so it's a very different mindset when you're building an evergreen company because pace growth is an essential part of your strategy. And you also lastly have to have an incredible ability to ignore the noise because there's so much pressure out there to get people to grow faster. People talk to the friends and they'll say, look, I'm growing 15% a year. And they go, wow, that's not very interesting. Well, over long periods of time, it's not.
Talk to me in 10 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Talk about In-N-Out Hamburger. We talked about that a little briefly too, So I was looking at the stats on this. So How many In-N-Out hamburgers were there in 1965? How many stores do you think?
Probably 10 at most.
5.
Yeah.
How many were there in 1971?
Not a lot more.
12.
Yeah.
How many Kentucky Fried Chickens were in 1965? 1,000. 1971, 4,000.
Yeah.
Burger King from 100 to 800. McDonald's 738 to 2,500. These were growing at massive rates of raising outside capital, being sold to conglomerates, going public. And there's a little in and out, just plugging away, just doing each one well, developing its next manager, keeping the menu simple, all fresh foods. Well, today it's about 425 stores doing about $2 billion in revenue, and it's owned 100% by the family. Ray Kroc's family does not own a share in McDonald's today.
The thing I would emphasize is something that most people don't realize, which is that you don't need outside capital in order to grow. That there is to finance your growth internally. And I think when we discovered that, it was it was a it was like a bright idea that we hadn't understood before. There's actually a formula that you can calculate to see what your growth is going to be based on the amount of profit you're generating, the amount of cash flow you're generating.
Both, that's a good point. When coming from the venture world, I associate growth rates with the amount of capital you raised. I didn't associate growth rates with the quality of your business model and the cash cycle. And so a really important measure, which I never heard about even in Stanford Business School, is like calculate your self-funded growth rate. I mean, how fast can you grow based on your current cash? And then you can pull levers to actually make that more attractive. You can change the business model to make that more attractive. But you may see, for example, that on a self-funded growth rate, you can actually grow 18% a year, and maybe you're growing at 12. And so, hey, look, there's more opportunity in this. We're missing. Let's go get into this and dig deeper because we should be able to hit this theoretical limit. Now, if you want to go faster than that, you're going to have to adjust your business model. That may be changing kind of the way you handle inventory or payment terms, or maybe you go to a subscription model when you're in a transaction model. There's a lot of ways to think about this, but you start getting really creative about the way you start generating cash and the cash terms versus focus on how am I going to raise that next round of financing. And how am I going to sell some investors and give me the capital who hopefully will not mess up my business.
Well, and actually outside capital oftentimes, as you both have alluded to, can have the opposite effect because then you're incurring more debt, you're giving away more ownership of the company. You could, and in some cases, it is great. It is exactly to your point.
Raise that capital, the expectations are growth.
Exactly.
I mean, if you go in and you try to raise money from a top venture capital firm and say, I'm going to be very comfortable growing this 15% a year for the next 30 years of my life, you're not going to even get in the door.
No.
Because the way those fund economic models work is they need one or two in that portfolio of 50 to become worth billions and billions of dollars. So all the shots are focused on that, which is, and they go into each of those relationships thinking, this could be that one. We don't know for sure, but we believe this could be that one. And the guy that says, look, I'm building one growing at 15% a year. And by the way, I'm going to get profitable right away, or maybe I'm already profitable. It'll be like, well, that is not interesting to us. Because success for you will happen in a time frame that's well outside the time frame of our fund. Yeah. So I'm not saying, I think a lot of venture capitalists or friends of mine would say, look, I think that model works. It's just not a model that fits with what we have to do, as Bo said earlier, to be of service to the people that provide the capital to us.
It works for ownership. It doesn't work for investment.
Right. That's exactly right. It can work wonderfully for ownership. And if you believe in the idea of planting seeds of trees that you will not enjoy the shade of, which is a famous thing, that's what evergreen companies often do, particularly the founders. They're willing to defer personal gratification to plant a beautiful tree that their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren someday will benefit from.
All right. So you said evergreen just now. Let's define that a little bit more for those that are still kind of bouncing around, listening. Great conversation to this point, but talk about that term evergreen. Not so much the definition of it, or define it if you'd like, but just when you look at it evergreen, what is it about a company that makes it evergreen? Talk to that. The average listener of the show is an executive or a senior leader, 40 to 55 years old, probably runs a business of, 5 to 10 million. There are some who are much bigger and some much smaller, and don't have the long history of multiple generations in the business and so forth. So help us all understand kind of that term evergreen, and then take us into the founding of the Tugboat Institute and how people can get involved.
That's something that we explain in the book. It really grows out of Dave's experience in terms of seeing these companies. In other words, he saw these companies that had all these wonderful characteristics among themselves. Why, what were they? Why do you, what should you call them? They didn't have a name at that point. And he began to have to figure out.
Just add a comment. Some of them were employee owned. Some of them were founder owned. Some were multi-generational family businesses. Some were foundation owned. So it wasn't that. These weren't just family businesses or just employee businesses. There was something in common across these different ownership types that we're trying to bring forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the ownership type that makes it. It's it applies across all.
That ownership type to private.
Yeah.
Truly being private. And Bo, but I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to
that's an important point that you're making.
Yeah. And so we're looking for a new one. And we kind of saw this as a category. I couldn't identify a good name for it. And so sometimes I learned this going back to my Silicon Valley days. Well, if there's a new category, just give it a name and try to own it.
Great name.
And so we started calling these evergreen companies, and I started bouncing this off early people I was interviewing that appeared to be heading in this direction. And I got a lot of nodding, like, hey, that's kind of that's a cool analogy, beautiful, majestic evergreen trees lasting hundreds of years, growing a little bit every year, some years faster, some years slower, resilient through all four seasons, there's
healthy. It conjures up that image of it's being healthy and strong and slowly. You can't sit and watch a tree grow, but you can go back in 10 years and see the growth.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point too. So I think people were attracted to that. And then as Bo alluded to earlier, the gentleman who helped me get this all off the ground, Chris Alden, said, Dave, we need to be a little careful here because this is a cool name, Evergreen, and we want to call these evergreen companies evergreen businesses. But if we don't define it beyond that, somebody may end up co-opting us in the future and kind of stealing the name and then redefining it. And that's when he pushed me to develop the 7 Ps. He said, we need something like this. And it was a great moment where Chris identified the need for that. And of course, it became really helpful because now we're putting a stake in the ground, not just with the name, but a set of principles. Exactly. And that let people self-identify to us as part of Tugboat Institute, saying, look, I've been running my business very consistent with those 7 principles for a long time. If you got others like that, I like to meet them. Let's get together. And that kind of was what brought Tugboat Institute to life.
We are very much an assessment-driven society. We have personality tests, we have strengths tests, we have all these different tests that measure us. We have scales we stand on every morning to measure our weight. We measure everything. The old adage, you can't improve what you can't measure. Are there measurements or assessments around these 7 Ps? I'm not looking for a simple quick fix, but how does an organization really assess where they stand today in those 7 Ps?
Well, it's interesting. We have 2 products. One is Certified Evergreen, which somebody can do that with us, which is an in-depth certification and assessment where you have to submit data, employee surveys, owner surveys, and we will play back to you how well we think you're doing on each of the 7 Ps and overall, plus a bunch of ideas about how you could further mature the company, your highest leverage, highest opportunities against that. And then based on encouragement from others, we did a kind of a lighter weight assessment. That's called the Evergreen Growth Navigator. That's one where you don't have to do employee surveys. You don't have to do owner surveys. But ideally, a CEO or president or owner can go. This is on our website at tugboatinstitute.com. And they can fill out, it takes about an hour, answer a series of questions. And then same thing, we'll share directionally, not with the same level of fidelity, but directionally how you're doing as an evergreen company against each of the 7 Ps. And again, a set of opportunities we think would be valuable to you. So those are 2 things we're trying to do to help the broader world have a better sense for where they are. And then, of course, if you read the book, we kind of lay this all out too. And I think a lot of people read the book and they go, whoa, I think we're actually doing pretty well.
Doing
here.
All right.
Maybe, we're doing well on 6 of the 7 of these. We need to have a family meeting because I'm not sure everybody's on board whether we're going to have this be a private company for another 50 years, but this has now catalyzed a conversation I have known I've needed to have for a number of years, and I'm going to use the book as a vehicle to get everybody on the same page about what I think we're trying to build together. So I think the book's a valuable tool. I think Certified Evergreen's valuable, the Evergreen Growth Navigator, and we're going to continue to try to find ways because, as Bo said at the very beginning of this, This is an incredibly important part of our economy, and it's not well understood, and it's surely not celebrated. And these people need to be celebrated. You know, people should be seeking them out for employment. They should be seeking out to be their customers, to be suppliers. How cool would it be to be a supplier to a company that's committed to be around for another 100 years? So as a supplier, the things you're innovating, you're partnering with this company, knowing that we are building things we hope will be of service to the market for generations and for decades. And so that's a really wise area of investment versus somebody who you may just find out 12 months later after doing a major partnership with them, they sold themselves. And the acquirer decided to shut down the division. You know, took out some of the assets, shut down the rest, your partnership's over. What a waste of energy.
We all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
I think
we want to be we want to be part of a team. We want to be part of an organization. We want to be part of a family. We want to be part of something that's just that Maslow hierarchy. I mean, that belonging. And you don't belong if you don't feel like there's a purpose. You know, if I go to work every day and I'm laying bricks again, I hate to keep using that analogy, but I love that analogy and that parable because it works and it really paints a picture. Am I just, capping bottles, or am I creating celebrations and memories for families who are going to drink this Coca-Cola or this Budweiser or whatever it is that I'm capping? So think bigger about what your purpose and your role is. Finish this sentence for me, either of you. If I were starting a company today, I would make sure I
would make sure that I had a strong purpose and that I knew why I was doing it, that I knew exactly what it was that this company, which exists today only in my head, it's something that I imagine. But when it's completed, when we're done building this company and we've been around for a while, what is it that we're contributing to the world? Why is it important that this company succeed?
So good. So
I think
good.
and that is an addendum to that, because that's the most important, was just personal readiness. Are you ready to kind of carry some pretty heavy water, go through some difficult periods? Now, with the clarity of purpose, it's going to make that easier. But building something, particularly if it's going to be an evergreen company, is a tough challenge. The rewards are unbelievable. When you get to a profitable growth position with a strong team where you go into the office and you just want to clap your hands because people are operating so well, it's a feeling like no other you will ever have. You won't get that from venture or private equity or being a public company. It's very different. Building from your own fuel, it takes grit, perseverance, resourcefulness, being thoughtful about your business model. There's a lot of things you have to kind of put in place. And so I wouldn't go into it casually. I'd go into it when you're ready. Maybe you feel like you're emotionally ready, maybe a little bit of financial wherewithal. It doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, Spikeball is a great example of a company that was basically started on the side, right? Chris kept doing his core consulting work during the day and worked at nights and weekends. So there's ways to do this. I do want to say one thing, because I've seen this, and it doesn't take away from Bo's comment or my comment. There are companies who found their purpose later. It was really, they were fired. They didn't want to have a boss. There was something that got them started on the path of entrepreneurship, but at some point they figured out there was something much deeper happening here, and there was something they could really get excited about. So where it might have been in the beginning a paycheck equivalent, a wage independent, and this could be 5 years in, 10 years in, 15, 20. I've heard multi-generational families redefining their purpose and saying, look, that purpose that's going to serve us well for the last 100 years is no longer servicing it. So we've redefined the purpose to have greater impact. And Edward Jones did this just 4 or 5 years ago, for 100 years. And so I'd say, well, if somebody has that clarity, that's amazing before they start the company. But it doesn't mean that they can't find it later too. And I hope they do, because, having a really deep, meaningful, authentic purpose is an incredible thing.
Yeah. And that phrase of, why'd you go into business for yourself? Well, I can't work for other people. It's not a good answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it is in a way.
But it could be a starting point. It could be a starting point.
Yeah, right.
But at some point, if that's the only reason why you're doing it, that's going to wear thin after.
Yeah, because you're going to work for other people. You're working for your customers every day.
And it's not going to rally your employees.
Exactly.
The fact the CEO and owner can't have a boss. I mean, how does that motivate me to show up for work?
Right. Exactly. Who would you say are some of those most inspiring leaders, whether you want to name names or you want to just talk about characteristics? And I want to be cognizant of time here. We've been going for an hour and I'm sitting here thinking we could go for another 3.
We have Bo go first on this one.
Yeah, just what is it about? Name a name if you want, but more importantly, characteristics of the leaders that you admire the most.
Well, I could talk about what it is that makes for a great CEO, which is humility. And, humility is a great aspect of it. But I'm trying to think of the members of the Tugboat Institute. Think of somebody like Robert Passon, who's the head of Radio Flyer, or my cousin, the Van Hollingsworth. These are people who have it in their blood, and that they're trying to do something that's going to matter over the long term. They figured that out for themselves.
Well, for me, really, I said this earlier, but Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett,
Yeah,
were two remarkable leaders. And the development of the idea of the HP way, which is such a noble way of thinking about building your business, how you treat your people, make a technical contribution, contribute to your communities. I mean, these are really good things that unfortunately got diluted over time. And I think part of that was just being in the public markets for too long and then getting some CEOs leading the firm that didn't have that same characteristic and humility and the things that Bo said, have Dave and Bill. But I do, like Bo, I turn to our community because I feel so fortunate. We have almost 300 CEOs and presidents that lead with humility and grace and care. And I like to say that you feel this sense of a kind of a higher consciousness about their relationships with other human beings. And that's expressed both within the company and outside the company. And as we all know, if you do any of the research studies on kind of happiness late in life, it comes back to relationships. It's not the size of your bank account. It's not your net worth, number of houses or boats you own. It's like, who have you surrounded yourself in your life that you've really been able to enjoy? Close friends, family, work colleagues, and all that. And my feeling is like, they're doing it early. They're enjoying that experience. Many enjoy later in life. They're enjoying it earlier in life because they've chosen to make relationships matter and to care about those relationships and how they treat people. So yes, this is Val Hollingsworth, and this is Robert Passon, and it's Oscar Gonzalez, and it's Rick Keyes, it's Penny Pennington, it's Andy Taylor, Don McCaskill, and Ben McCaskill. I mean, the list just goes on. Chris Maynard. These are people, I love to say this, there's not a single person in this group I wouldn't enjoy spending a long weekend with.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's
good people.
Yeah, there's many groups I've been part of. Well, there are those people too, but it's not all of them. And there's most groups, there's some people I'd rather not spend any time with.
This is like a big chill moment, the big chill weekend where they all come back together for the professor's funeral. You're getting all these people together. It's just friends.
Yeah.
Just people who just love each other and want to do good things together.
Yeah.
I've taught, I have an opportunity to teach at the college level. I have a class right now that I'm teaching in the sports management world because that's where I come from in my background. And these are undergrad. First time I've taught undergrad. Second time really, but I've taught, master's degree programs in the past. But these undergrad students I'm having them create a sports venue, a fictitious sports venue and leadership style and who the leaders are. There's 5 on each team. And I told him, I said, look, if you don't, and this is thanks to Reading Another Way and thanks to our earlier conversation that we didn't record, I want you individually and as a team to identify your purpose. Why does this organization, this venue, this event exist? But more importantly, as a 19, 20, 21-year-old, identify today what your purpose in life is. It doesn't mean what your job is. Your purpose doesn't be, I want to be a CEO of a multi-level, multinational, technology company. Great. If you get there, that's great. But your purpose doesn't really change with your job. Your purpose, your core values are your core values, no matter what you do for a living. And I like watching and seeing their eyes open as they start thinking about purpose and like, why am I creating this floating volleyball court on the ocean in Tampa Bay, Florida? Well, what's the purpose of this? Think about the people and think about the experience that you're creating, not the money you're going to make. So I appreciate this conversation. Like I said, areas we haven't gone. There's a couple of quotes on the back of the book.
Can I, real
Yeah.
quick before I do that?
Yeah.
One thing I want to say, because I don't want this to be lost with your audience. We
Sure.
are not saying that you cannot generate tremendous wealth
Right.
in building an evergreen company. You absolutely can. But it's a byproduct of this contribution you're making to society. It's a byproduct. It's not the purpose of the business. And, and what we find with most people is that running evergreen companies, that their actual wealth needs are much lower than others because they're so satisfied in the work they do and the relationships they have that they will redirect a lot of the excess profits of the firm back to the employees and to philanthropy. I mean, these are some of the most generous people in their local communities. And we have one member, which I think is fairly remarkable, Meyer. Rick Keys is the CEO of the firm. It's Meyer. Hank Myers is the chairman, where the family will not take a distribution that's larger than the amount that's given to philanthropy in that year. So philanthropy is number one. And that is fairly common to hear about these commitments, but it's done quietly with humility. And it's not to wave a flag and brag. It's trying to be there to make a difference. For example, Andy Taylor at Enterprise Rental Car, same thing. The arch needed to be repaired. It was extremely expensive. And Andy had the resources to do it. And he said, look, I want to see a little bit better governance around how we do this in the future because it never should have gotten to this state of disrepair. But with that agreement that will fix the governance of the arch, I will underwrite this. And he did. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And it's an important part of the skyline in St. Louis. So it's just over and over again, back to the thing you said earlier, which is like, how much is enough? They know what enough is. And enough really is coming from what they're building and achieving their purpose and something to do with their bank account. But again, with tremendous wealth is available. But as you earn it, you start realizing that it was never really even the goal anyway.
We had Andy Taylor out here a couple of years ago to speak at our Cal State Fullerton Family Business Hall of Fame. And I was just...
Hall of Fame is a good place for him to be.
Right. Yeah. many different, no doubt about it. The speakers we've had, Lindsay Snyder in and out, Jeannie Buss of the Lakers, Andy Taylor of Enterprise, Ken Blanchard, Peter Mondavi. We talked about Robert with Radio Flyer, working on getting him at some point, all Hall of Famers in their own right. And what impressed me about Andy, and I talked with a lot of people. We had 400 people in the room at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library in Orange County. And I talked to many of them over the course of months and even years after Andy spoke. What impressed all of us wasn't, $1 billion a year in growth. And we're now 28 billion. And last year we were 27 and next year we're going to be 30 or whatever. That's impressive. Those are numbers most of us can't comprehend. But he's just the guy next door. He's the guy, like you said, I wanted to spend the weekend with. Let's go on a 3-day weekend and go fishing or playing golf or having scotch and a cigar in the backyard, whatever. And he could be my neighbor.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah, be incredible. So there's a couple of quotes on the back of the book. Dennis Jaffe stands out. The writing, candor, and concreteness made this a unique and practical book that will advance the message that there is another way to do business, one that creates real, lasting value. Dennis writes, as you know, about 100-year plus companies, just as you guys have as well. Was that the goal when you wrote this? Was to what was the goal of this book? What's the goal? What do you hope? I guess the question, what is your hope for the impact of this book and the work you do at Tugboat and the work you do with the other books, Bo, that you've written? And just, when you hang it up and you're having those long weekends with your buddies, you're not really in the grind every day anymore. The impact I hope I made is what?
I'd turn to Bo first because Bo is the reason why the book exists.
Yeah,
he catalyzed this.
No, well, I know we could talk for a long time about that because it's really Dave that has provided the reason for the book. Well, I know that for me personally, the impact is on the people who read the book. In other words, for me, nothing matters except that the people who read the book find it valuable, find it helpful. My job is to serve them. Knowing that I have served them is the greatest reward that I can get for what I do.
It goes back to that servant leadership concept that we've talked about with Ken Blanchard and others, and Ken didn't coin it, but I could say Ken wrote the book on it because he literally wrote a book called Servant Leadership in Action. Dave?
I think mine has to do with I hope it impacts the lives of tens of millions of people. And it impacts them from the standpoint they get to experience what it's like to work in an evergreen company and be respected and valued and challenged and developed. And maybe they work for one evergreen and they don't cut the mustard and they realize that wasn't the right purpose or the right fit, and they find another one. But I think it'd be really unfortunate if most people, and I'm not just saying Americans, but most people don't have the opportunity to work in these type of environments, because it really is the best of capitalism. It's much better than working under some of these other models of ownership where it's pretty damn tough on the employee base. And I think, that'll kind of re-inspire a whole generation of younger people to be founders of these type of companies, because they'll see, hey, look, I can have meaningful purpose. I can have these great relationships with people. I can make a significant contribution. And I don't have to sacrifice all of that for some exit, some high valued exit. I can actually build something that's truly lasting. So my hope is that it actually over time has a significant impact on a lot of lives in a very positive way.
Couple last things, and I'll let you go. First of all, thank you. I'm sitting here in tears practically listening to the two of you talk, because you practice what you preach. You both talked about how a trait that you admire, and it's gonna be hard for me to say this without getting emotional because it means so much to me. A trait that you both admire and the leaders that inspire you is humility. And all I saw in the two of you throughout this entire conversation was deep humility, deep love for each other. You both wanted to give credit to the other for this book, which I thought that was pretty cool. But I think that's such a massive trait. I look at the leaders I've worked for, the leaders I admire, the family businesses I work with that I admire most. Humility is number one every time. Companies and individuals have every right to brag, every right. Look at what I did. Look at the billion-dollar company that we've created. Look how we've taken it from 5 stores to 425 stores under my leadership. I mean, it's easy, and you know who I'm talking about, but I won't say the name. It's real easy to look at, we live in a society of look what I did. We're measured by look what I did. But the true measure of a great person is what they do, to your point, Bo, what we do for other people. Gary Ridge, my dear friend, WD-40, you both know Gary. He's always talking about wealth isn't what you own. Wealth is in who you inspire and who you touch and who you impact. And I think that's what you're doing. You're both doing. I think you're both doing it tremendously well. I had a question in there, but I lost myself in the humility conversation. And maybe I'll reserve the right to ask you that question down the road. When I know what it was going to be, I'm working with a company right now, real fast, real quick little story without naming names. The organization, it's a family-owned company here in Southern California, very successful, multi-generational. One department right now is having some trouble in leadership, in productivity. Is this something a departmental head can do effectively not apart from, because obviously, certainly there are certain limitations if it's not your company, but talk to that mid-level manager who may be running a team that wants to make their team an evergreen team, if that even makes sense. How would you go about that?
I think it's very possible. I mean, the analogy I draw is from Toyota, and I believe it's Tachi Ono had developed the just-in-time system, and he started it at his own work cell. Just the way he organized himself and reduced waste. And then as he had employees working for him, he expanded it to that work group, and then to that department, and then to that division. And then eventually, when he became CEO, to the entire company. And so, maybe for the inspiring mid-manager, someday they will be the CEO of an evergreen company, either one that they get promoted into or that they start themselves. But yeah, I think that you can look at the 7P principles, and there's things to be taken from all of them. You may not be able to control whether the firm is private or not at that level of the organization, but I don't know why you could not do everything in your power to have a real people first experience for those people working for you, and doing pragmatic innovation and setting expectations, with your bosses about how you want to pace the growth of the work you're doing and why that's going to be lasting by doing that. And, having a purpose within the team, what is that contribution we're trying to make that's more than just generating wealth, And so I would hope that in most organizations that would be rewarded. There'll probably be some organizations where it might not be, but it might be a really good signal to that middle manager, which is, hey, look, I gave it a shot here.
Yeah.
There's too much resistance. I want to go put myself in an environment where I can do this.
It could be the termite theory. It starts at the bottom and eats its way up, and eventually the whole organization, is doing that.
It would be beautiful.
Right.
It should happen.
Yeah, no doubt. So I encourage all of you who are listening, who run a department,
Termite.
Yeah, be a termite. Yeah, don't chew into the foundation where it crumbles, but recognize that you can have a pretty big impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing impacts the foundation of a home like a termite. That's for sure. So, Bo, what are your thoughts? You looked like you were getting ready to chime in a little bit.
Well, no, I actually get so much from actually the two of you and your observations and your comments on the people who you work with. And because I admire you both, Ed and Dave, I try and live a life that I can be proud of.
Mm.
And that you never reach it. You are continually striving for it, but it doesn't you don't achieve it. You the listening to the two of you actually and watching the two of you inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing.
Wow. Nothing is a greater compliment than that.
Well, thank you.
No, and I admire you. When Allie's been telling me about you, Bo, in particular, for many years, and the inspiration and the impact you've had on her. And Allie is one of the, probably, I hate to put the top 5 on there, but I can't think of 5 other people that have had an impact on me personally and professionally outside of my family as Allie has. So, and I can see that she learned a lot of from you as I'm getting to know you. And Dave, you're an inspiration that, not that you got out of the capital venture world, I don't mean it that way because you're still in it, but that you took the lessons that were meant for you and taught those and are teaching those to other people. Because there could have been a lot of different lessons. It could have been greed first. It could have been, I got to go make my billions and then I'll make my impact and then I'll give. But you're doing it all along the way. You're watering the flowers as you walk the path. And that's that. I love that. I've heard that analogy before. And to me, it's one of the most powerful analogies. You're moving forward, but you're sprinkling the water on others and helping them grow as you go. And I think that's pretty cool. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Ed.
How do people reach, Dave, we'll start with you. How do people reach you? They want to learn more about the Tugboat Institute. They want to purchase another way. We're going to put all the links in the show notes, but just from your perspective.
And probably the best resource is my website, tugboatinstitute.com. And there's a share button on that too. That actually goes to me. So I'll take, if you want to write me, you can write me through that. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there too. It's probably the 2 best ways.
Okay. Bo, similar?
The same. I would say, I mean, I do have a website, boburlingham.com. This mainly, I haven't updated it lately. I should actually. Talking to you makes me realize that I should make it more about another way. Right now, it's my book Before That, Finish Big. Actually, that's how I met Allie. I think that I'm on LinkedIn, and anybody can write to me. Just write boburlingham.com, and it'll wind up in my
it'll get to
folder.
You. All right, last couple of questions, and then I'll let you go. First of all, again, I want to thank Allie Taylor, Orange Kiwi Consulting, Gary Crisp of Crisp Imaging, our partners, for making all of this possible. Without them, we couldn't do what we do here at the podcast and the other ventures that we have going on. So thank you to them, and thank you to Allie in particular for bringing Dave and Bo to my attention. Boy, I got some flowers and bottles of wine I got to get sent off to her for this, no doubt about it.
Well done, Ed.
Big goals. What's next? What's next, Dave, for you? What's that big thing out there that, you can't wait to start on, or you've started on and can't wait to make progress on? And then Bo, same question.
Well, it's really related to kind of the vision I have for Tugboat Institute. That would be the big. So it's continuing to grow this membership group at Tugboat Institute of CEOs and presidents of evergreen companies. And then it's really shifting. The book is the part of this shift. And to how do we share these ideas as broadly as possible to try to have as much impact as possible? How do we touch the next, we have 300 companies that are part of our group.
Yeah.
We're not going to get that much larger. But how do we touch 10,000 companies, 20,000 companies? I mean, and so that's kind of what will be happening over the next decade for me, is to try to bring these ideas to as many companies as possible to achieve what I said earlier, which is hopefully impact tens of millions of people's lives very positively by bringing forward and celebrating and recognizing these evergreen companies, and hopefully having a few founders creating along the way too.
Yeah. people who are working for those 300 companies who eventually may have take this idea they have and go start it and want to mimic what they've learned
And
where
be
they currently
celebrated
are.
by all those CEOs and families too. I mean, Jack Stack was a good student. He taught me about that too. It's like, don't force your best people to stay with you, which I was used to in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It's that celebrate them taking all these lessons of how to be a great entrepreneur and support them in building their own companies. And then, like you said, then that will have a ripple effect. So
The
that's
CEO philosophy of what if I train my people and they leave? Well, it's better than not training them and they stay, right? Let's train them, give them a chance to be happier here, fulfill the purpose here. And if not, go create a purpose somewhere else. Go
absolutely.
fulfill your purpose doing something else. I mean, I applaud anybody that does that. Bo, big goals for you. What's on the horizon that you're most
Well,
excited about?
actually, that's something that I'm struggling with right now, that I'm thinking about right now, which is what should it be? There is a book that I am considering getting involved in, but it given my age,
29.
what?
29.
Yeah, yeah, right. um, I feel as though I need to do some things to actually. This discussion with you has helped me think about what I should be doing next. And if anybody has any ideas, please write to me at bo@boburlingham.com.
You're going to get an email from me because I got an idea.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So my last question that I ask all my guests, and Dave, since we started with you on the beginning of the conversation, I'm going to start with you again because I'd like to give Bo the final word on our podcast today. And it's just a simple question that's based on my last name of Hart. The name of the podcast is From the Hart. You are about guests 150 or so. I've lost count, but it's around that number now. And so I've had the privilege of getting conversations with a lot of amazing people, present company very much included in that statement. Dave Wharton, what's in your heart?
I'd be my family, my wife, 2 kids. Yeah, hold that dear in my heart.
Yeah, love that. I could tell. Didn't come up in the conversation, but I could tell just by getting to know you that that's your lighthouse. Bo, final words for you. Bo Burlingham, what's in your heart?
Well, I would say the same thing as Dave, that it really has to do with I've got grandkids now, so I'd include them in that, but it's really my family. I hope that I have a good effect on them and on other people as well. And I really want them. I want them to know how important they are to me, and I think that's the most important thing. Is that I understand that relationship is worth focusing on and developing constantly, forever.
You've reminded me of a question that I'm starting to ask a lot of my partners. I asked a twin sister co-presidents of a family business here in Southern California that Allie knows well and that I've worked with for 15 years. I asked them this question, and I've loved asking this question when there's an obvious partner involved in something. So Dave, I'm going to ask you, what's your hope for Bo?
Boy.
Uh,
Well, I hope he has a long life and that he gets to really feel the impact he's had in the world. It's significant.
Yeah, it is. I've only known you a little while, and I'm deeply moved by both of you and Bo, your experience. So Bo, the last word. What's your hope for Dave?
my hope for Dave is that more people, will understand what he's trying to do, and that the rally to it. It's really, my hope for Dave is really that he continues to have a great impact on the business world, because I think it's very positive, and frankly, it goes beyond the business world. It's actually about our society and about how our society is growing and how it can be a better society. And I think that Dave is contributing to that by doing what he's doing, and I hope that he has more impact on more people as time goes along. That's what I hope.